Good morning, boys and girls. Today for math, we'll be working on our Topic 8 review, day 2. Okay, before we even get started with that and showing you what that is, I'm going to review some of the Topic 8 review from day 1. So as I was looking at a lot of our work, I noticed some things that I want to give you guys as a whole class some feedback on. Okay, remember when we are doing this review or when we're doing any assessment, we always want to check our answers and make sure that our answers are reasonable, okay? Making sure that they make sense and they match our question. And we also want to make sure that we're always going back and rereading the question and making sure we answer all parts. Okay, so those are some things that I noticed. So for example, let's look at this. So this is what is the sum? So that's asking you the sum. So you're just adding those numbers together. In this first problem, it's not asking you an estimate. It's not asking you to explain. You're just adding as the numbers as they are and writing the answer that you received. Okay. For this one, it says find a reasonable estimate for the sum of 109 and 168. Select all that apply. This is a type of question that we are very used to. We see this every day in math in the classroom since, September. So that whole select all that apply. When you see that, you are selecting more than one answer. Okay, so I noticed that a lot of us only had one answer. What we want to do with these problems is you want to go through each answer, think about it, and see if that would be reasonable for your question, okay? So for example, let's see, 109, 168. Let's see, 100 plus 200 equals 300. Would that make sense? If I were to estimate, meaning let me estimate 109, would I estimate 109? Would I round that to 100? Could I do that? Would that make sense? Of course it would make sense, right? That means I'm rounding to the nearest 100. So now I look at 168. If I round 168 to the nearest 100, would that be 200? Yes, 100 plus 200 equals 300. I can check that one off because that would be a reasonable estimate for the sum. Okay, now I go through to the second one and I look. 150 plus 150 equals 300. Let's see. 109, I shouldn't say n, 109. Would I round that to 150? Would that make a lot of sense or not? And then 168, 150. I don't see how that would make much sense. If I were to round 168, I would maybe round it to 160 or 170, or like we did up here to 200, or maybe even 165. But rounding it to 150 wouldn't make sense. Same with 109. It wouldn't make sense to estimate 109 to be 150. So I would not click that one. Let's look at this one. 110 plus 170. 109. Could I round that to 110? Would that make the equation easier for me to add? Yes, of course. Remember when we do 5s and 10s, those are those numbers that are easy for us to add. 170, 168. Let's see, would that be a reasonable way to round 168 to 170? Yes, right? It's only 2 off. And is 110 plus 170 easier to add than this? 109, 168? Yes. So I would also check off this one. Okay, now I'm not going to keep stopping. Oh, I got 2. Let me stop. No, go through and check every single one, right, to make sure. 105 plus 165. Now let's see. Would that make sense? Would that be a reasonable estimate? 105. This is 109. Would that make sense? I mean, yeah, like I said, the 5s and the 10s, when we add 5 and 10, 5s and 10s, we want to round to that. It does make the problem easier for us, and 109 is pretty close to 105, right? So I would say that's a reasonable estimate, and that kind of talks about the compatible numbers, which we learned in the beginning of the chapter. Then let's see, 165, this is 168. Would that make sense? Yeah, I think that would make sense. We could definitely do that. And 105 plus 165 is equal to 270. Those numbers are easier to add, and they are compatible numbers to these two numbers. That would make sense. Let's see. I would check that one off. 120 plus 180. Let's see. I always go back to my problem and think about it. 109, 120. I mean, 120 is easy to add, but why would I do 120 when I could just do 110, 105? Because that's a lot closer to 109, right? So that doesn't really make sense. 180, yes, 180 is an easy number to add. Like these two numbers, 120 plus 180 are easy to add, right? But why would I round 168 to 180? I could do 160, 165, 170, but 180 is kind of just seems like an odd number and doesn't seem like a reasonable estimate, right? Okay, so if I were to do that, I would not click this one. Okay, so I would have 1, 2, I'm sorry, I can't click on this because of the version that I have, and then this one. So I would be clicking 3 response. Remember that select all that apply and go through each problem. And it says reasonable. We talk all the time in math class about reasonable, see, can't click it, about reasonable answers. Okay, so you want to go through and make sure that your answers are reasonable. And it says estimate. It doesn't say to find the sum like this one did. We had to estimate. Okay, so we had to estimate first and then add. So be careful of the wording, okay? Same with this problem, estimate the difference, okay? We have that word difference. What does that mean when we're using that word difference? Estimate the difference means we're subtracting. Hopefully you all said that. If I subtract 825, 213, I first have to estimate, right? They don't want me to just subtract the two numbers and give the answer. We have to estimate. So then what I would do is I would estimate 825 and 213, and I would explain what I estimated those two numbers to and that I subtract. Okay, so for example, if I were to estimate 825 to 830, okay, and 213, I rounded that to 210, and then I subtract it and I got 620. Okay, I would write my equation down here. Okay, after I write my equation, I would explain what I did. Okay, because it says explain your estimate. How did you do it? Oh, well, I would type in, I rounded 825 to 830 and 213 to 210. Then I subtracted and got my answer of 620. Okay, that would be explaining your estimate. So be careful. It doesn't want you to just subtract. They want you to estimate first. When you see that estimate, make sure you estimate first. Sorry, I'm saying estimate. Estimate first. Let's see. What else did I notice? Okay, so use mental math to find this 436 minus 238. Now, they don't want you to just subtract 436 minus 238, right? They want you to use some type of mental math skill. Okay, so what would make sense? Could you do 430 minus 230 and then subtract? Okay, and then add on, or 240. Could you do, let's say, 440 and 240, right? And then you have to subtract, right, 2 from 238, and then 4, and then get your answer. Okay, I hope that's making sense. But you don't have to think that way. That's just my thinking. But they want you to use some type of mental math to figure it out. They don't want you to just do 436 minus 238. Well, how can you break that down so that it's easier to subtract? Again, select all equations that are true. Go through, check each single equation, see if it's true. Again, you guys should have scrap paper when you're doing this work. You should be writing it down on a piece of paper and trying to solve if you need to, right? You can drop whatever you need to do. We talk about there's always different ways to show our work to solve our problems, okay? So make sure you're doing that. And then this is just which strategy shows a way to check your work using inverse operations, right? So inverse means the opposite operation, okay? So what would you do? Okay. You would subtract 45 from 228 and see if you get 180. And that would be the inverse operation estimate the sum by rounding to the nearest hundred and explain how you estimate. So again, they don't want you to just the sum. When we see that word sum, that means we are adding. They don't want us to just add these two numbers. What do they want us to do? They want us to estimate by rounding to the nearest hundred. Okay, and then explaining how we estimate it. Okay, so a sample answer would look like this. Let's see, 320 and 490. So if I were to estimate that and round 320 to the nearest hundred, I would get 300. And if I round it 490 to the nearest hundred, I would get 500. Then I would add 300 plus 500, which equals 800. Okay, so I'm estimating and I'm explaining in sentences how I solved that problem, how I estimated, okay? So just some things that I wanted to kind of go over with you guys. Double check your work before you hit submit. Make sure, you read carefully your question, okay? Because like I said earlier, this one, you don't have to estimate this first one, okay? And then there are other ones where you do. So be careful. Okay, that's what this whole chapter is about, estimating and rounding and finding reasonable answers, okay? All right, so today you guys are going to complete topic 8 review, which is here. Okay, if you notice, look, this one says find the sum of these three numbers. Am I estimating there? Hopefully you said no. It doesn't tell me to estimate, right? It just says find the sum. And what does sum mean? It means to add, okay? So you will be adding. And if you look down here, it says estimate. So this is where you have to estimate each number and then add. Okay, so be careful. Read each question carefully. Make sure you're doing, what they're asking you to do. All right, keep working hard. You guys are doing great. And have a great day. Talk soon. Bye.